We continue the topic of secret societies, and we're going to focus on their secret weapon, which is mind control. They're able to turn you into a programmable robot that they can use as a weapon. But before I start that, let's review what we discussed last class. This is a class of ideas and concepts. So it's really important you understand these concepts because we will build on them throughout the semester, okay? So last class, we discussed the transformation of religious worldview during the course of Western history. So at first, there was the mother goddess, then transition to polytheism, then monotheism. And during this transition, the way that our minds perceive the world radically changed in three aspects. The first is that before we understood that mind led to matter. So the universe is just one giant mind that vibrates, okay? And the intersection of these vibrations creates atoms. Then that leads to matter, okay? But today in science class, you're taught that's the opposite. It's the brain that creates the mind. And as you will discover throughout the semester, this conception that the brain creates the mind, it's very problematic. Okay, so we will discuss this throughout the semester. Okay? The second big difference is before we understood the world metaphorically. Okay? So we saw that the world was controlled by these forces that we could not see and feel, but they were there. And we gave names to them, the gods. Now it's all literal. In science class, you're taught that if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. If you cannot measure it, it does not exist. The third big difference is that before we were intuitive. We trusted our heart. We trusted our eyes. But today in science class, you're taught to not trust your eyes. You're taught to trust the data, the tools, the theory. So today is counterintuitive. And this is why school is so hard. Okay? We humans are learning machines. That's what we're designed to do, to learn, to absorb, to adapt. But school is hard because you're taught ideas that go against your own intuition. Okay? So these are the main concepts that we learned last class. So now I want to talk about mind control. Okay? So let's go back to the four earliest civilizations. These are mass societies. So these four societies that first came into being are China, the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan civilization, which is now northern India, Mesopotamia, which today is Iraq, and of course the last one is Egypt. And of course Egypt was for thousands of years the most powerful, the wealthiest, the most influential. Now, when you have a mass society, your biggest problem is social control. How do you control the population? How do you get everyone to get along? And in each society, there are different solutions, okay? So in China, we developed a bureaucracy. And what underpinned the bureaucracy, of course, is something called the keju, which is the civil service examination. So everyone's attention, everyone's energies was focused on getting their child to pass the keju to become an official. And that's what gave China social stability. And guess what, guys? It's still around today. Today we call it the Gaokao, okay? But it's the same system, no difference at all. The IVC, the Indus Valley Civilization, created religion. And what's remarkable about the religion is it is one that preached egalitarianism, equality, as well as peacefulness. And their religion becomes the prototype for Buddhism today. Okay? So what the religion was Proto-Buddhism, and for the longest time, the IBC was peaceful and egalitarian. It was a very prosperous society. Mesopotamia, the solution was war. The difference between Mesopotamia and other places is that there are no natural defenses. In China, we have mountains, deserts, seas to protect China. But in Mesopotamia, it's a desert. And so it's really easy to attack. And therefore, they had centuries of warfare. And that's what kept their society together, because they were always at war with each other. And with Egypt, the solution was the Pharaoh, right? So Egypt is unique in that they believed the Pharaoh was God, and therefore everyone had to obey their God. The problem, though, is that the Pharaoh was not God. And as a human in charge of an empire, his life was always at risk. Okay? So now I'm going to ask you a question. What does it take to be a great leader? In school, you're taught what skills do you need to be a great leader? Just shout out the answers. Leadership skills, but what are they? What are they? Responsibility, right? How about, what else? Wisdom. Openness. Empathy. Excuse me? Regret? Respect, yeah. What else? Knowledge, right? Okay, this is what you're taught in school, and we can go on for a long time. Okay, there are hundreds of skills you need to be a great leader. Guess what, guys? Wrong, okay? To be a great leader in the world, in history, you need 3 skills. And if you just analyze what the leaders of today are like, it will make sense to you, okay? So Putin, Trump, every leader in the world shares these 3 skills, okay? The first is unpredictability. People cannot predict how you will behave. You are a mystery to people. That's the first skill. Second skill is high stress tolerance. So Donald Trump is probably the most hated man in America. Guess what, guys? He goes to bed and he sleeps like a baby. He does not care. Okay? He gets up and he's tweeting, he's giving speeches, he's talking to reporters. He's the happiest man alive. He does not care. And so the last skill is lack of empathy. He does not care what happens to other people. All he cares is about himself. And guess what, guys? To do well in life, you need these 3 skills. Unpredictability. No one knows how you think. No one knows how you behave. High stress tolerance. You don't care. Lack of empathy. You're very selfish. Okay? And these are the 3 skills that leaders need in order to do well. But you know what? We can just use one word to describe all 3 skills. The word we can use is dissociation. Dissociation just means that your mind is part of your body. When you dissociate, what literally happens is your mind leaves your body so that you don't think that what's happening is happening to you. It's happening to someone else. It's like you become an observer in a movie. Okay? You're in the movie, but you're also watching the movie. And this is what leads to these 3 things: unpredictability, high stress tolerance, and lack of empathy. Okay? Another word for dissociation that we use is multiple personality disorder. Donald Trump is so unpredictable because he's literally 100 different people. In a different circumstance, he's a different person. And that's why you can never actually predict how he will behave. And all the great leaders in history were like that, okay? So let me use game theory to explain why this is the case, okay? Game theory. So in game theory, we discussed before how when you have a game where there are millions of different players, okay? The secret to winning this game is cheating. And you do that by forming secret alliances, right? So these three do it. The problem is, this is actually pretty obvious. We understand this rule. So guess what? A lot of people form secret alliances. Okay? So to win this game, if you want to win this game, you have to be part of as many powerful secret alliances as possible. You have to be the intersection of these groups, okay? So you're here, but you're also here. You're also here, okay? But as we discussed previously, these secret societies have developed systems to make you loyal, to make you obedient, to make sure that you will never betray them. So the only way around this problem is to create multiple personalities. Right? Because literally, you're a different person in a different circumstance. And therefore, they're never able to figure out what you really think. Spies have the skill. Okay? When spies are being recruited, the one skill that they're looking for is dissociation. Is this person able to quickly dissociate from who he is? Lack of empathy, basically. They're all psychopaths, basically. Okay? So in real life, in a game, it's a person with the most multiple personalities that wins out. The problem, though, is when we go back to Egypt, the pharaoh is born in that position. So now the question is, are you able to take a person and create multiple personalities from that person? And the answer is yes. Okay? So I'm going to show you how. By the way, the word we use for this is psychopath. Okay? All right? If you have multiple personalities, you're a psychopath. All right. So I'm going to show you how they do this in Egypt. Remember, a pharaoh is born into that position, and so now the priests who control the pharaoh, they have to train that priest to have multiple personalities. The mystery today is, how would they do this? And again, we don't know, but I'm speculating how they would do this. Okay, so if you look at mythology, Egyptian mythology is different from all other world mythologies. There's Greek mythology, there's Chinese mythology, there's Babylonian mythology, but Egyptian mythology, it's unique. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you the basic contours of the mythology. Very simple. So there are three main characters in the mythology. There's Ra, the sun god. There's Osiris. And there's Horus. Okay, these are the three main gods that Egyptians worship. Ra is what gave life to the universe. He's a sun god. Osiris is the god of civilization. He built Egypt. Okay? And then Horus is the god of kingship of empire. He's the one who brings stability to the throne. Okay, so there are different stories associated with Ra, Osiris, and Horus. Ra, what he does is every night he goes into the underworld and he fights the serpent, Opithus. Every night, Opithus, the serpent, he's trying to swallow the sun to prevent the sun from rising. So Ra must kill him every night. Okay? And there are different ways that he kills Opithus. Sometimes he stabs Opithus with a knife. Sometimes he uses a lance. Sometimes he burns Opithus. Okay? Sometimes he strangles Opithus. But there are different ways that he kills Opithus. But rest assured, he kills Opithus every single night so that the sun can rise in the morning. If one day Ra doesn't defeat Opithus, well, you have a solar eclipse. Okay, the sun cannot rise. But rest assured, Ra will defeat him eventually. Okay? Eventually, Ra gives birth to Osiris. And Osiris is a great pharaoh. But his brother, Set, it's pronounced Seth, okay, but it's spelled Set. He is jealous. He wants the throne. So he tricks Osiris. One day he says to Osiris, look, I built a tomb, and this tomb is really comfortable. And so Osiris, oh, let me try. So Osiris jumps in the tomb, and he's like, whoa, it's really comfortable. And of course, Set then closes the tomb, and then throws the tomb away. Now, good news is that Osiris has a smart wife. He's pretty dumb, but Isis is pretty smart. So Isis is now looking for Osiris. And Set's like, oh, I can't allow Isis to find Osiris. So Set cuts Osiris into 1,000,000 pieces, okay? So tomb, and then he cuts up Osiris and throws Osiris all around the world. But Isis is committed. So Isis goes around the world and finds all the pieces and reassembles him, okay? But she knows that eventually Set will find them again. So she has sex with him really quickly, which gives birth to Horus. And Horus wants the throne back. So he goes to war with Set. And they have a series of challenges, okay? And some of these challenges include drowning. So what they do is they turn each other into hippos. They go into the bottom of the river, and they see who can hold the breath the longest. They drown each other, okay, basically. But also, there's a challenge where Set, can you see this word? Okay, R-A-P-E, okay? He will do this to Horus because it's a sign of domination. But eventually, Horus wins out, and he becomes the pharaoh. Okay? So this is the main structure of Egyptian mythology. And as you can see, it's really weird. Okay? And it doesn't really make sense as a story. It's not a great story. But if you don't see it as a story, but as a script, it makes a lot more sense, right? It's not something to be believed. It's something to be acted out. Okay? Why? Because in Egyptian religion, the pharaoh is a literal reincarnation of Ra, Osiris, and Horus. And when you act these things out, you become the gods because you have their memories. Okay? So, how? Let me explain this, okay? I know you're a bit confused by this, but let me explain. So let's go back to Kant. What Kant tells us is that there's something called the noumena, which are the things in themselves. We can never know the things in themselves. We can never know true reality. We can only know the phenomena, which is the things we see. In other words, we cannot differentiate between what is true and what is false. So if you're able to control our experience, you're able to control our memories. Okay? So let me give you another example of this. Remember Monkey Island? On Monkey Island, we discussed this previously. 100 people are transported onto an island randomly, and they have to survive millions of flesh-eating monkeys. And this experience makes them strong, wise, and united. They're transported back to the real world, and together they conquer the world together. But now the challenge is, how do I ensure that my children and my grandchildren inherit my legacy? And the answer is through ritual. Okay? So what you do is you take your children, you put them on an island, and you tell them a story, and then you give them psychedelics. Psychedelics are drugs that enhance your experience. So you actually believe the story is happening to you, okay? It's like being put into a movie, okay? And then you have these rituals that make you believe that you actually experienced this yourself, okay? So this is what we call programming. And this is the great secret of the human brain. Every human brain can be programmed in a certain way. Okay? So let's go back to the story. What's going on here? This is a recipe for programming the pharaoh into separate identities. All three of these individuals, Ra, Osiris, Horus, represent different identities. Ra represents the virtuous hero, right? Osiris represents the passive victim. And Horus represents the vengeful child. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So, by doing these different rituals, I can get the pharaoh to believe he's a different person in different circumstance. So, while the pharaoh is drugged up, the pharaoh is dressed up as Ra, and he will take an effigy or a real person, and he will stab, lance, burn, or strangle that person to feel as though you're a virtuous hero. And also what will happen is that the pharaoh will then be asked to be Osiris. And guess what? The person will be put in a tomb, cut up, and have sex with a prostitute, okay? Pretending to be a priest. And then Horus will be, of course, this, okay? So this is all to create trauma, which creates disassociation, which allows the priest to program the pharaoh. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So how this works is, while this is happening, there's the pharaoh is under a lot of trauma, but there's always someone there to support the pharaoh, and that's Isis, right? So there's a priest in the Isis mask using the Isis voice to calm the pharaoh, even have sex with the pharaoh to make the pharaoh dependent on Isis. And now Isis becomes the controller, the person that the pharaoh will always trust. So if the priest ever want to tell pharaoh to do something, then late at night, while the pharaoh is sleeping or on drugs, Isis, wearing the mask, can come in and whisper to pharaoh what to do. Okay? And in the system, there are different ways in which the priest can use to activate the different identities. But the main mechanism is smell. Okay? Smell. And what this means is that while all this is happening, there are different scents for different identities. Okay? So for example, with Ra, it might be incense. Okay? But with Osiris, it might be, I don't know, roses. Who knows? Okay? But so what happens is when the pharaoh is the throne room and the priest need the pharaoh to make a certain decision, the priest will let out different scents, which will activate different emotions in the pharaoh, which then determines how the pharaoh will make the decision. Okay, so there's different control mechanisms. Okay, and what's important for us to understand is we're all like this, right? Because, for example, we have different identities. At school, we're a student, but at home, we're a child. When we're outside, we're friends, we're a friend. When we're at work, we're an employee. So we behave differently depending on the different circumstance. And the circumstance activates a certain emotion, certain identity, certain behavior, certain actions in us. Okay? So we're all programmable, but the pharaoh has to be programmed to a certain degree. Okay? So to better understand this, let me give you an example. Let's just say that you are the best football player, the best soccer player in the whole world. No one can beat you. You're basically Messi, okay? But one day, for example, for whatever reason, you wake up and you lose all your memory. You forget what your name is. You forget who your friends are. You even forget that you play soccer. And what's also really strange is the entire world forgets that you play soccer. Okay? So you're just wandering around and you have no idea who you are. And you do this for like 10 years. Suddenly one day, for whatever reason, you're on a soccer field and someone kicks you a ball and you kick it back. Would you still be the best soccer player in the world? The answer is yes, you would be, right? Why? Because you've been trained. It's muscle memory. It's your subconscious. So that's the trick here. The trick is to train you in a certain way to make you a robot. Okay? Is it possible for me to make someone into a killer? Yes, because what I do is I make that person take a lot of psychedelics, and then train that person to shoot someone with a gun, okay? And then while he's shooting that person, I use the word abracadabra. So what happens is the person, if he's walking, has a gun, all they do is use the word abracadabra, takes the gun and shoots someone, okay? All right? So through programming, I can turn anyone to a robot, I can turn anyone into a sex robot, a killer robot, even a sex killer robot. Okay, I can do all this. And that's this great secret here. All right, so 5,000 years ago in Egypt, they were doing this. But again, okay, what's really important is, this is all speculation. And it's really important for you to doubt and question me. Because we don't actually know that this happened. All the records have been lost to us. And obviously, this would be the greatest state secret of Egypt. But from my perspective, it makes sense. Because the Pharaoh needs to be like this in order to survive, right? Because the Pharaoh has brothers who want his throne. If he's a nice guy, guess what? Dead, right? So that's true for everyone in power. If you're a nice person who feels sorry for poor people, you're dead, okay? So you have to have certain characteristics in order to be a great leader. And the main characteristic is dissociation. So the priests are actually protecting the Pharaoh, okay? Does that make sense? All right. So I know this is hard, but I need you guys to remember the story of Egyptian mythology because we'll use it over and over. Also, these techniques that they use, tombs, cutting you up, sex, drowning, rape, are also techniques that we still use today. So what they did in Egypt 5,000 years ago, we still do today. There's absolutely no difference. And I will show you this as we move on. Okay, but are there any questions so far? Yeah? Sorry. Can you speak in the microphone, please?
So they only trained the Pharaoh by this method and not his relatives, his brothers or something.
Okay, that's a great question. So who's being trained into this system? And the answer is everyone, right? Because the people really in control are the priests. They're what we today call the deep state. And it's possible the Pharaoh gets in an accident and dies. Okay, so you need someone right away to replace the Pharaoh. So everyone in the royal family is being trained into this. The problem arises when the priest class divides into different political factions who all want power. Then they program the Pharaoh's brother to create a civil war. Okay? So everyone who is in the royal family is being programmed like this. But then this raises a really interesting question is like, why would they agree to this? Right? Now, what's interesting is that these psychedelics and these trauma create something called NDE, okay? What we call near-death experiences. So for like a minute or 10 minutes or half an hour, they are literally dead. And what we know is when that happens, and it's really interesting is when you feel you're almost dead, you transcend into the spirit world. In the spirit world, you actually meet God. And we know this because tens of thousands of people have had an NDE, near-death experience. You know, they got in a car crash and they blacked out. Or they were drowning and they almost died. Or they had a heart attack and died. They all went to meet God. And they all said, up there in the spirit world, it's all peaceful. It's all love. You can feel God in you. But God told me I cannot die. I have to come back and tell people the true spirit world. So the royal family does this because it gives them wisdom and access to the spirit world so that they feel as though they're truly God. Okay? And that's why they agree to do this. All right? But then the question then is, how do the priests know how to do this? Because they experiment on themselves. Because they're priests and they want to access the spirit world themselves, and they recognize that near-death experiences and psychedelics are the best two ways to go into that world. So they drown themselves, they cut themselves up, they starve themselves. There are lots of ways to create near-death experiences, okay? But that's how they know the secrets. And what's amazing is we have not improved on the Egyptians today. Like all the modern technology, all the modern medicine, science, we're just doing what they're doing, okay? Okay, so does it make sense, guys? Okay, any more questions before I move on?
So
okay.
There's no difference between heaven and hell.
Sorry, excuse me?
There's no difference between heaven and hell because, I mean, technically speaking, if you do bad things, you will never go to heaven. But and then if you experience NDE and you still meet the spiritual world, then you'll realize that there's no difference between heaven and hell.
Okay, that's a great question, okay? So what is heaven, what is hell? Why should you do bad things? Why should you do good things? There's no difference. Okay, so what people who suffer NDE will tell you is this. When you go up to the spirit world, the first thing that will happen is something called a life review. What is a life review? A life review is just, you're able to see exactly what you did your entire life. So if you're a bad person, that's hell. Because you're able to now feel pain for the first time, right? Dissociation means you don't feel any pain, but guess what? You're just tricking yourself because when you're up in the spirit world, you have to see exactly what you did to other people, and you have to feel their pain. Okay, that's what hell is. And heaven is, you can see the good that you did, okay? So what they say is that when you do evil, you create negative energy. And when you do good, you create positive energy. And you can't see that in this world, but up in the spirit world, you're able to see for yourself, finally, how much evil you did and how much good you did. Okay? And that's what heaven and hell is. Okay? And, I mean, I don't want to go too much into this, but another theory is that when you die, the only thing that remains in you is love. Okay? So love is actually a physical force. And the more love you have, the higher you can ascend in the spirit world. And the less love you have, well, you're kind of stuck and you have to come back and do it again. Okay? So, be a nice person. All right? Okay, great question. Okay, so are we clear about this? Okay, well, we'll discuss more about near-death experiences later on, in the spirit world later on. Okay, but I want you to understand that 5,000 years ago in Egypt, they discovered how to program the pharaoh into a robot that they could control. And we still use the same techniques today. Okay? Any questions before I move on? All right, so let's go to the PPT. Okay, so as you can see, in Egypt, it's the priests who are really in control. The pharaohs are just the puppets. Okay, and it makes sense, right? Because one person cannot control an entire empire. It's the priests, the bureaucrats, who really have the power. Okay, so we talk about dissociative identity disorder, right? And you think, wow, it's really great to have all this power. But actually, the one thing about dissociative personality disorder is you can never feel happiness. In fact, you can only feel misery. So the way to reduce your misery is by making others more miserable than you are. Okay, so the people in power are committed to making the world as evil and as unhappy and as miserable as possible because that's the only way they can feel good about themselves. Okay, so this is dissociative identity disorder. As you can see, it's really bad, okay? You have identity confusion, you have changing memories, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, okay? Internal voices. It's not a great feeling to have this. All right. Sorry, what is going on here? Oh, great. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So now I want to talk about 9/11 and the war on terror. This is Donald Rumsfeld, and after 9/11, America decided that they need to take offensive. They need to hunt down the terrorists and control their behavior. And so they started to arrest terrorists. But then bad things start to happen, okay? So this is a prison in Iraq, Abu Ghraib, where they arrested terrorists, and they were doing strange things to these terrorists, as you can see. Okay, so this is pretty disgusting stuff. And this was leaked to CBS News, and CBS News showed all this. Okay? All right? So it's pretty disgusting. So now the question then is, why is this happening? And there have been different explanations. The military says, these are soldiers who went crazy and they went rogue. So we've arrested them and we've punished them. But then they discovered that they're actually psychologists who were responsible for this program. So these are two psychologists, and they were sued by the victims. And during the court testimony, we discovered that they were paid $80 million by the CIA to develop this program. So what is going on here? This is not something that happened randomly. It was designed by the government, by the CIA. So why is this happening? Well, they call it enhanced interrogation. Okay? This is a book, The Dark Side, by Jane Mayer, who's a fantastic reporter. I highly recommend this book. She's a reporter for New Yorker and spent years looking into why this torture happened. And what she argued is it's an experiment to change the mentality of these terrorists. And the theory is called learned helplessness. You can basically take someone like Ra, okay, the virtuous hero, and turn him to Osiris through certain techniques. Okay? Remember, Ra, the identity, is the virtuous hero who fights Apophis every day. Osiris is a person who gets tortured by Set every day, okay? So the goal of this experiment is to turn Ra into Osiris. And the person who learned helplessness is also the person who developed a new theory called positive psychology. His name is Martin Seligman. Okay, so positive psychology that you're learning in school is brainwashing. Okay? All right. So that's a theory, and it's a great theory, and this is what most people believe. The problem, though, is it doesn't actually work. Because after the CIA started to torture all these prisoners, they became ISIS, Islamic State. Isis is the name of what? The Egyptian goddess who saved Osiris, right? And who fathered Horus. Do you think it's a coincidence? Maybe not. Okay? Maybe not. So ISIS is this fanatical death cult that are terrorists who go around the Middle East and kill a lot of people. Okay? You might have seen their videos where they do a lot of nasty stuff, like beheading people. Okay? So what a lot of people discovered is that there's actually a direct connection between, ISIS and this torture. In fact, in many academics, so for example, Jeremy Suri and Andrew Thompson, they discovered that many of the ISIS fighters the US is currently combating in the Middle East deepened their extremism during the time in prisons, controlled by the United States. So it's really strange. The United States thought that they were going to use the psychology to turn Ra, the terrorist, into Osiris, the citizen. But they ended up doing the reverse. Osiris became Ra. How stupid were they? Right? And these guys were paid $80 million to be this stupid. Okay? So this is Human Rights First, an organization that started to interview these prisoners of America, okay? And what they discovered is these prisoners told them, okay? Their testimony shows that ISIS recruitment is still ongoing, unchecked by Egyptian authorities, and fueled in substantial part by the torture and other abuse that pervade Egyptian prisons. So it's really strange how these prisons are almost training ISIS terrorists. What's going on? Well, let's go back to Guantanamo Bay, okay? The answer lies in these prisons and what they're doing there. So most of these prisoners were so traumatized, they forgot what happened. But we have one man, Abu Zubaydah, who remembered what happened. He's a Saudi citizen who was captured. And he told us what they were doing to him, okay? So we're gonna go through his story. And you tell me what the story reminds you of. So they basically were force-feeding him, torturing him, strangling him. Then they put him in a coffin and they drowned him. Then they used a power drill to do this to him, okay? To basically cut him up. Whoa, do you guys remember the story? Oh, and also sexual humiliation, right? Where they had a woman who tried to seduce him. Also, guys, right? Do you guys see this? What is the story, guys? What is the story? It's a story of Egypt. This is what they did to Pharaoh 5,000 years ago. It's the same story. It's the same script. In other words, what they're really doing is they're trying to turn these people who are mostly innocent into terrorists. They're trying to turn these people into drones that they can program and unleash in the Middle East. That's the real goal. Okay? So it wasn't that the experiment failed, it worked. ISIS is an American creation, designed to create as much chaos as possible in the Middle East. Let me ask you this question. If you really wanted to get information from these terrorists, what's the best way to do that? Pay them money. Be friends with them. Be nice to them. Take them out to dinner. Okay? We have lots of evidence to suggest that if you just be nice to these people, they'll tell you everything they know. You don't have to torture them. You torture them because you're trying to turn them into secret weapons to be unleashed in the world. Okay? All right? So, 5,000 years ago, they were doing this to Pharaoh. And now they figure out how to do this to anyone using drugs, using torture, using ritual abuse. Okay? So all these ISIS fighters, they're robots controlled by the American military. They're drones, they're human drones used. Okay, why is this important? It's important because 5,000 years ago, trying to control the Pharaoh was first and foremost about social control. So there's a program called MK Ultra, started in the 1950s and 60s, led by a chemist called Sidney Gottlieb, okay? And the point of MK Ultra was to figure out how to brainwash people. And for the longest time, this was considered a conspiracy theory. But a few years ago, the CIA, the US government, admitted we actually did this. But not anymore, okay? We did this before, but not today. Not today, okay? Okay, so if you're curious, there are lots of documents, government documents on the internet that you can read, okay? But the MK Ultra was a program designed to test the effects of drugs and brainwashing on innocent American citizens, especially children. Okay. So some of the documents are now public, and guys, just so you know, most of the documentation, the most sensitive documentation, was destroyed by the participants. So we only have a few of the documents. But some of the things that they were doing was brainwashing, okay, using drugs, hypnosis, in order to control people's minds, okay, interrogation techniques. They were working with foreign intelligence officials to conduct mind control research. Okay, so the things you couldn't do in the United States legally, they were doing in Egypt, which created what, guys? Probably Al-Qaeda, okay? They were also doing things that were really weird. For example, they started a brothel. And so if you came to the brothel, they gave you drugs. okay, like LSD, and they were trying to figure out how to control your mind. But they won't do this to most people, right? Okay, well, I'll show you later on. You'll be surprised. Okay, so this is Sidney Gottlieb, and he was the man responsible for MK Ultra. And he's a chemist, okay? So he's trying to figure out how to use these drugs to control the population. And you're like, well, this is just weird. And if you talk to experts, like, well, the MK Ultra results were terrible. But then ask yourself this: what is social media? What is, if you feel bad and you go to a doctor and the doctor gives you drugs, how do they know these drugs work? Okay, so MK Ultra did work, but they hide the fact of its effectiveness. And the results of MK Ultra have spread throughout society. Guys, good news. You're now the Pharaoh, okay? Each and every one of you are now the Pharaoh. Congratulations. Something really funny about psychologists is this. Sorry, why is this happening? Okay, you may not know this, but psychologists have been known to have a greater propensity to have mental illness than most people. Your psychologist is literally more screwed up in the brain than you are. Okay, you don't believe me? Do some research. And this is really weird because if you went to a doctor and the doctor was fat and unhealthy, that'd be problematic, right? Also, I have not met anyone who's gotten better psychologically after seeing a psychologist. You guys might have, and I'm sure there are lots and lots of people who benefited from seeing a psychologist, but I myself have never met anyone or seen anyone who's benefited from seeing a psychologist. And that's really weird because if you break your leg and you go to a doctor and like for years and years your leg doesn't get better, well, that's a problem, right? Okay, so something to keep in mind, okay? So, any questions? Questions, guys? So I know this was a lot to take in, and we'll be expanding these topics as we move on, okay? But some key takeaways is all societies are first and foremost concerned with social control. And what's really interesting is who we are as a human being has not changed in thousands of years. So that the way they were controlling the Pharaoh in Egypt 5,000 years ago is really the way that they control us today. And I'll show you how as we discuss the mass media, okay, and mass education and mass psychology. Okay, we have a question here.
In that case, shouldn't the social media be controlled by government? Like, for example, why Twitter or say X could be a personal thing owned by Elon Musk?
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so if it's true that social media is a mechanism for social control, why are they being controlled by private citizens who've made billions of dollars doing it, right? Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Who built the internet? Do you guys know who built the internet? The US military, right? Because the internet is controlled by these cables that run around the world. Who built all these cables? The US military. Do you think they would do this for free? Why would they do this? Okay? So Twitter, Facebook, that's the public face, okay? But what people forget is behind Facebook and Twitter are all this infrastructure that's being controlled and protected by the US military. So why would the military do this? Okay? All right. And again, this is a class about speculation, about theories, okay? I'm not telling you what's true. I'm just raising questions and possibilities about what's really going on, okay? And also, like, I don't know what they did in Egypt 5,000 years ago. I'm just speculating. It's just a theory. It's a nice theory, but I have no evidence that it's true. Okay? This is a disclaimer. Take what I say with a grain of salt. Be skeptical and doubtful of what I say. All right? Okay, any more questions? Okay, great. Okay, so I'll see you guys next class.